Gauteng provincial government says that the crime wardens which have been started in the province now have the same powers to arrest people that police officers do. The province also says that they have the legal right to carry a gun and to be issued equipment, I presume, like the BMW vehicles that they're currently using. Gauteng says this is because the Justice Department has now officially declared these wardens as peace officers, which would then, it would seem to follow, give them the same powers as the Gauteng Traffic Police, which come under the Department of Community Safety there. But the wardens have only had 1 or perhaps 2 months training. Dr. Jean Redpath is at the Dullah Omar Institute. Dr. Redpath, good afternoon to you. The Gauteng provincial government says these officers have the power to arrest someone, to carry a firearm, basically the same legal powers as a police officer who's in the SAPS. Is the provincial government right?
No, they are incorrect on a number of levels. The fundamental problem with the whole project is that a province does not have any competence to carry out policing in terms of the Constitution. So quite apart from any conferral in terms of Section 334, which I'll get into later, the Constitution says that a province has the power has 3 types of powers. 1, those provided for in the Constitution in relation to policing. 2, those assigned in terms of national legislation. 3, those allocated by the Minister in National Policing Policy. Now, the last 2 we can ignore because there's been no assignment in legislation. There's been no allocation in national policing policy to the province, this province or any other province. The constitutional powers for provinces are very, very limited and basically relate only to oversight. Actually carrying out any kind of policing, therefore, has no constitutional basis whatsoever. Now, when it comes to the Section 334 declarations, how these work is you have an underlying provincial competence or municipal competence or institutional competence. So, for example, both KwaZulu-Natal and the Western Cape have the power to make legislation and create offences around liquor licensing. So they do that and they have liquor officers. So then they go to the Minister of Justice, and the Minister of Justice will confer specific powers in terms of that liquor legislation to enforce that legislation. So that the designation in Section 334 will say liquor officers employed by the relevant institution have the powers in relation to the liquor legislation and within the jurisdiction of the relevant province, whether it's Western Cape or KwaZulu-Natal, and then they designate the powers which are not the full gamut of powers by any stretch of the imagination, even though those people have been designated as peace officers. So they will typically be given powers to issue written notices, to search and seize objects involved in the offences, and also sometimes to arrest. So when someone is declared a peace officer, that it's usually highly limited to the specific thing for which they have been declared. And for that declaration to happen in the first place, there needs to be an underlying competence, an underlying legal and constitutional basis, of which there is none in relation to the Gauteng Crime Prevention Wardens, so-called wardens. The other problem is, right now, there has been no publication in the Gazette. So even if there were a provincial competence, there would still need to be a publication in the Gazette of, as I've said, which would designate the type of person who would be empowered, for what offences they are empowered, in which jurisdiction, and the specific ambit of their powers, which is often quite limited. Then each individual person has to be given a certificate of competence from the National Commissioner of Police. So each and every one of the relevant people in that category has to have a certificate of competence before they can exercise any of those powers. In relation to firearms, that's a completely different system that works under the Firearms Control Act. You have to be, a particular institution has to be accredited as an official institution, and then employees of that official institution would then be given permits. They would have to go through various competence trainings to then be given permits to carry a firearm, and there are strict requirements that apply to those permits. So at the moment, right now, the crime wardens have no powers other than those of an ordinary citizen, which are not nothing. An ordinary citizen can arrest someone committing a serious offence in front of them. And they also seem to be operating in a constitutional and legal vacuum. They have no basis in the Constitution.
All right, so Dr. Redpath, thank you. I mean, I think you sort of touched on a lot of things there. So basically, just because the Gauteng Premier wants them to have the power to arrest someone, that doesn't make it so. Just because he wants them to carry guns, which is a completely different thing, because, I mean, normally to carry a gun, to own a gun, you actually have to have gone on a course, you have to prove that you're competent. They're also not allowed to carry guns. Full stop, finish and clear, to use a policing phrase.
Yes, so right now, so there's the first question of whether they should exist at all, which I'm saying is unconstitutional for there to be provincial crime prevention wardens in the first place who are carrying out policing functions. That's unconstitutional. Then on top of that, they need specific, if there was such a, let's say the Minister of Police allocated a specific function to Gauteng, and then there was some kind of legal basis on which Section 334 could happen, then they would have to each individually be accredited to do that, and the whole issue of firearms would be a separate issue which goes through the Firearms Control Act, and there they need to be employed by an official institution. Now, which official institution who has been accredited by the Firearms Registrar are they employed by? It's not clear. And that institution then has to issue permits and ensure that they are competent to carry a firearm, and ensure that and then retest them yearly. So that it's no easy, and what particularly disturbed me was the conflation of their role with traffic officers, which is really an insult to traffic officers. Traffic officers undergo 2 years of rigorous training, which has recently been extended to 3 years, almost the equivalent of a bachelor's degree, before they can be accredited as traffic officers. And, you know, the kinds of training that these people have received falls far short of that.
Okay.
And so it's a real concern.
Well, Dr. Redpath, there's quite a lot of other questions to ask. So then, if I'm walking down the street and I'm committing a crime, say I'm drinking in public, which is a crime, you're not allowed to drink a beer in public, and a crime warden wants to arrest me, can I dispute their power to arrest? I mean, can I say, no, go and get a cop?
Yeah, so in my view, they have only the powers, citizens' powers of arrest, which means that they can only arrest in terms of Schedule 1 offences. So these are the serious offences in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, things like theft, murder, rape, etc., etc. Drinking in public, I have to go and check my schedule, but I doubt very much that would fall under Schedule 1, and therefore they would not have such powers.
Okay. There was a case, News 24 reported on this yesterday. There was a case over the weekend where a police officer, so a member of the SAPS, was off duty. He was drinking in public, and frankly, he should probably have known better because he would have known that that's illegal. But he was, I'm going to use the word detained because I think arrest would be wrong, but he was detained by crime wardens. There was a bit of a dispute between them. He says they assaulted him. Eventually, they, if I remember the story correctly, put him in a BMW X5 and then eventually dropped him off at the Tembisa hospital. So now you have the situation where a crime warden who does not have the power to arrest has arrested someone who does have the power to arrest, in the police officer. And one of the concerns I think many people have, because you can see from, there's an internal memo that has become widely available, the Gauteng Police Commissioner, Elias Mawela, has told his officers not to assign any duty to a crime warden that would normally be conducted by a police officer. They can't act as a commissioner of oaths, they can't do anything that a police officer can do. But we're going to see tension between these two groups.
Almost certainly, and then that scenario that you laid out would be an unlawful arrest, and that person arrested would be able to claim damages from the Gauteng department. So I hope that the Premier has a big war chest for all the damages claims that are likely to come through. And this is a serious infringement of the Constitution, the constitutional deal that was made in 1996, where the powers of different parts of government were delineated. There is no basis for provincial policing in the current legislative framework with the current policing policy.
And Dr. Redpath, I must ask about the situation in the Western Cape, but let me sort of put that slightly differently, because there may be an element of the city of Cape Town. They use there what are called LEAP officers. I think it's called Law Enforcement Advancement Program or something like that, but LEAP officers. They seem to be deployed by the province, but are they in fact employed by someone else? Because they do act very much in the way that the crime wardens were supposed to act.
Okay, so they can be distinguished quite easily from the crime prevention wardens because they are law enforcement officers that are employed by the City of Cape Town municipality. The involvement of the province has been in additional training and additional employment. So it's an additional 1,000 people that were trained, and which there is an agreement that a certain percentage of the cost of those law enforcement officers is paid for by the province. Now, this is only possible in relation to law enforcement officers because the national legislation outlaws outside funding for Metro Police. So, a municipality who runs Metro Police cannot get funding, say, for example, from a province. So this is the difficulty for Gauteng because all of the municipalities run Metro Police. They don't also run law enforcement. So there couldn't be a similar arrangement where the province would fund, say, Johannesburg or Tshwane to run additional law enforcement officers because they don't have law enforcement officers.
It seems to me, Dr. Redpath, that the Gauteng Premier, Panyaza Lesufi, I've reported on him for a long time. He's going to keep saying what he's saying, that they have these powers. You, and I think you're not the only crime person or lawyer that I've heard from in the last 24 hours who suggests that they do not have these powers. In the end, is a court or a judge going to have to make some sort of order here? Is someone going to have to take this to court to get finality?
Yeah, so the question is who will take it to court. So the very interesting political element here is that the official opposition has been campaigning long and hard for provinces to be allocated powers in national policing policy and to be assigned powers in legislation. Now, the Gauteng Premier making moves in this direction actually helps the case of the official opposition, particularly in the Western Cape, because they can then point to Gauteng and say, well, you allowed it here. Why aren't you allowing it in the Western Cape? Now, the Western Cape has tried to do things within the bounds of the law by using existing powers of law enforcement officers, but it certainly strengthens the argument that there is a need for devolution of policing powers, if even elements within the ruling party are pushing hard for that to happen.
Dr. Jean Redpath at the Dullah Omar Institute, really do appreciate the time. Thank you. It is complicated, it is important, and I know the Gauteng provincial government does have a very different view. They've already spoken, of course, to Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405 today. Dr. Redpath, thank you. Let's update